Good evening. It's Wednesday, the 27th of July. I'm Reagan King, and I'm joined by my co-host Simon Barrett. This is Behind the Headlines. This evening, we're going to be asking a very important question. Is Putin, the president of Russia, playing with fire in preventing Jewish Aliyah to Israel? Simon, a very big story here. As we discuss President Putin's closing of the Jewish agency in Russia, this is going to cut off Russian Jews from the possibility of making Aliyah. It's going to cut them off from the community in Israel and the education opportunities that are there, preparing people for Aliyah and enabling them to make that. It's going to bring a real freezing to the relationship between Russia and Israel. I mean, there are so many Russians who are in Israel. We're now going to see even those people turning against their land of their birth, arguably speaking, and it's going to be a very strange state of affairs, I think, over the next little while. What exactly is going on?
Well, I think this particular story has a huge prophetic significance, and we got to thank the work of the of the Jewish Agency that pre-existed the modern state of Israel, helped to prepare the state. And one of their main activities is they do an incredible work in helping to fulfill biblical prophecy by helping Jewish people make Aliyah from all over the world. But not only do they do that, but they also provide education programs. They train young Jewish people up in the importance and significance of Zionism, the support of the state of Israel. They provide that bridge between Jews in the diaspora and also the modern state of Israel as well. So what's happened recently is there's been some local court cases put together by, I think, the Russian Ministry of Justice, interfering very much in the process of Russian Jews making Aliyah. And they say, well, you broke the law on this one, you broke the law on this one. So what we're seeing now is the Kremlin, and no doubt that Putin is behind this, of actually closing all of the Jewish agency's operations in Russia, which essentially will mean possibly the end of Jewish Aliyah, like we saw as a throwback to the Cold War period when the Jewish people were not allowed to leave the Soviet Union. We're seeing, again, the fall of the Iron Curtain again on the Jewish people. So it has huge prophetic significance, because we know through scriptures at the times we're living in that it's God's desire and his heart to bring his Jewish people back into the nation of Israel, and it seems that Putin is stopping that. Also, what's been very, very alarming is that that Putin met last week with the supreme leader of Iran, Khomeini, and also the new Iranian president, together with Erdogan, to form a new strategic alliance against the West. So it shows that he's moving even more into the camp, the anti-Western camp, and that's where he's decided to pitch his tent. So, yeah, this is a very disturbing story. Obviously, it's a very sensitive story for Israel, particularly those who currently work with the Jewish Agency and with the Israeli government, because they're currently in a kind of legal battle with the Russian state and the Russian authorities, hoping that they will get these restrictions lifted and the Jewish Agency can continue to do its work. But we could see, very much like Pharaoh, Putin harden his heart towards Israel. And the prophetic consequences for Putin and Russia are very, very serious, because this is a direct collision course with coming against the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah, absolutely, Simon. And we are live and interactive. Viewers, please be sending in your thoughts, your comments, your questions. And this evening, we will endeavor to make our way through several of those. Now, Simon, the Jewish Agency, it's an Israeli NGO. You mentioned it predates the state of Israel itself. It actually was very significant in laying the groundwork for that. But in Russia, it's only been there since 1989. Since 1989, we say only been there since 1989, but it's done amazing work, significant work, in seeing about 1 million Jews make Aliyah just out of the former Soviet Union. Incredible. But now what we're going to see is 150,000. There's believed to be around 150,000 Russian Jews still in Russia. They are going to be completely cut off from Israel. from making Aliyah, from their family and friends. And of course, at the moment, with the geopolitical situation between Russia and Ukraine, and indeed now Russia and Israel, the question has to be asked, will they be able to make it to Israel at all? If they make it to Israel, I'm just going through things in my mind, presumably they'll have to do it in a fairly clandestine way and hope that Israel is going to be able to process them in a normal fashion.
I mean, also what we've seen since February and March with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine is that Aliyah has not only increased in Ukraine of Jewish people making Aliyah to Israel, that's immigration to Israel, means in Hebrew to go up, but also we see that Russian Jews have also seen a kind of crackdown on Russian society and freedoms in Russia, and as a consequence of that, many Jewish people in Russia are wanting to make Aliyah and to leave Russia. So of course what this does is actually hinder that opportunity to do so. So this is also very concerning. But also we have to look at what's happening with the dynamics in the Middle East. I mean, if you remember when the Russians invaded Ukraine, we had President Zelensky calling upon Israel's then Prime Minister Naftali Bennett to do more to stand and support Zelensky and Ukraine to push back the Russian advance or invasion, and Israel was kind of, we're on the middle ground, and we don't want to upset the Russians, so we're not going to fully come endorse on that one. The Democrats and Biden's administration also criticise Israel for sitting on the fence. But when you see Israel's strategic position in the Middle East and the fact there are over 60,000 even now Russian troops based in Syria, and I think for Israel to carry out offensive military operations against Iran in Syria, which then threatens Israel's security, then Israel needs that close coordination with the Russians in order to do that. So it's a very complex situation. Netanyahu, the former Israeli Prime Minister, was very proud of his personal relationship with Putin, but I think the whole situation has changed ever since Putin has invaded the Ukraine. I think this kind of concept of madness has kind of gripped him, and I don't think it's possible to have normal relations. And let's see where he steps this up in terms of creating probably an increasingly hostile relationship between Russia and Israel that didn't exist prior to his invasion of the Ukraine.
Now, Russia's relationship with its Jewish citizens has been difficult historically. We can go back to the 19th century and see and learn a little bit about some of the extreme pogroms that were occurring, specifically targeting the Jews. Even you can watch that classic film Fiddler on the Roof, and you can see kind of some of that playing out and portrayed in that musical fashion there. According to the Virtual Jewish Library, pogroms is what the Jewish people in Russia faced under the Tsar's ruling family in Imperial Russia. Pogrom is a Russian word meaning designating an attack accompanied by destruction. There was looting of property, there was rape, there was murder, there was a perpetration of violence against one particular society, one particular part of society by another, and almost always the primary target, the Jews. The first pogroms took place in the 1880s, the first that we have recorded in that particular way. Of course, anti-Semitism has been rife throughout Europe, and horrific atrocities have occurred. But in the 1880s, there was a period of political and social upheaval and uncertainty after the assassination of Tsar Alexander II by members of a revolutionary group organized called Narodная Volya on March the 13th of 1881. Rumors that were anti-Semitic spread that the Tsar had been assassinated by the Jews, and that the Russian government authorized attacks on the Russian Jewish community. So this is something that was a direct result of that assassination. We have to have someone to blame. We'll blame the Jews. And
or scapegoat.
Tragically, in this nation, in the United Kingdom, we've done the same. The Jews have often been a natural scapegoat that our politicians and various others have targeted. It's a very satanic thing.
No, absolutely. But I think it's also important to understand really that through the pogroms, and the first pogrom occurred in 1881, which led a lot of Jewish people to leave Russia. They left Eastern Europe. This is why predominantly we have so many Jewish people in this country now, because it stems from that first pogrom, that many came to build a new life for themselves in England. But many of them thought that they were arriving in the UK, thought this was New York, the actual destination. So many, and this is also where the vast majority of American Jewry comes from. These pogroms in the 1880s, but also we saw a large number of Russian Jews make Aliyah to Israel as well during this time, who were inspired by kind of Marxist ideas to create a modern state in the ancient promised land. It was Israel, which was then a province of the Ottoman Empire, and that was known as the first wave of Aliyah. So a very defining moment in history.
Now, one of our viewers wants a reminder as to what Aliyah actually is. We've talked about Aliyah many times on Behind the Headlines, but tell us what Aliyah means. It's that process of going
It's the
home,
Hebrew word to go up.
Yeah.
So literally it means in reference to go up to the temple. If you're in Jerusalem and you see the Western Wall and you go, even though it feels like sometimes you're going down, but if you are going down from the Mount of Olives and then you see the old city, you go up, and that's in reference to going up. So it's another word for immigration, to immigrate to Israel, to become an Israeli citizen, but this is the Hebrew and biblical term, is known as Aliyah.
Doreen is enjoying the program, but she wonders if we think it's possible for the UN to threaten Putin to let the Israelis out of Russia to go back to Israel. I mean, I may be a bit cynical, Simon, correct me if it's a bit cynical, but I don't think the UN really gives a care about what happens in relation to Israel. They've been overly critical throughout Israel's history, although the UN actually was a big part of the setting up of the nation of Israel. It has persistent in siding with terrorist organizations against Israel. So, I mean, is that a little cynical? Is that a bit jaded? Will they be able to pressure Putin?
Also, the kind of nature and the makeup of the UN would actually mean that Russia would have a lot of kind of Islamic allies, states, or third world nations that oppose the West would and they form blocks and alliances, so that bloc would never come forward. But it's not a bad idea. I mean, it's something, certainly if the situation deteriorates, then we could see that if you had a pro-Israel government in the United States, as we did with President Trump, then there's certainly a vehicle to actually use the UN to bring condemnation on Russia for preventing Jewish Aliyah. It's not Israeli Aliyah, it's Jewish Aliyah. When Jewish people go to Israel and they become citizens, they serve in the Israeli army, then they become Israelis. But the true term for those who are born in Israel is a reference known as Sabras.
Thank you for that clarification. Does Putin not know what happened to Pharaoh when he refused to let the Jews go? Russia, beware of God's judgment. That's from Joyce.
Well, Joyce has, I think, discovered the whole theme of our entire programme. So well done, Joyce. And that's exactly why we're talking about it. We will see history repeating itself. There's no doubt about that, because either you bless Israel and get blessed, or you curse Israel and get cursed. But we also want to raise awareness of this particular topic so that we can pray for Israel, we can pray for the Jewish Agency, who are doing a fabulous job, and also pray particularly for Russian Jews who are wanting to make Aliyah, that God would open the door and allow them to go, because it looks at the moment that the Iron Curtain's coming down on Russia. So the Jews making Aliyah.
The pogroms did not stay in Russia. They spread to Poland. There were other countries in Russia and Eastern Europe, including Ukraine. I mentioned Fiddler on the Roof, which is set in Ukraine. You mentioned that many of the Jews found themselves in England, thinking at first they were in New York. That is actually the story of my wife's family going back. They were traveling thinking they were going to New York. They settled in England, and then eventually her father would make Aliyah in the late 80s. But, it's one of those tragedies where you see, and I think this is where we have to remind our viewers, even before Pharaoh, there was Joseph. Remember, Abraham had been shown the land that would be given, but there was no settling in the land at that point. Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. He goes through a horrible time in the land of Egypt, but then he ascends to a place of power second only to that of Pharaoh. He experiences a reuniting with his brothers through a series of cataclysmic events. There was famine in the land. Joseph was used as a tool to save his family, the ones that had sought to destroy him. And at the end, after Jacob, his father dies, the brothers are, you can understand, they're a bit frustrated and concerned and vexed because they think Joseph, now that Israel is dead, he's going to kill them off, or he's going to make life very miserable for them. And he weeps, he's sorrowful that they have this lack of trust after this reuniting for some time, and says, look, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Absolutely. For the salvation of many. And so just as we saw through those pogroms, this process, the first Aliyah, many of the Jews in Russia were able to make it to what would become the modern state of Israel. The first wave of Aliyah was from 1882 to 1902. So this is something that's been going on for quite a while. Just as God used those pogroms then, He's going to use this now. We can't always see how He's using the current events, but history shows undeniably, irrefutably, God is sovereign and at work.
Absolutely, and it's also important also to remind ourselves of what life was like for the Jews living under the Soviet Union. I mean, we talked about the pogroms lasting from 1881 really up until 1921, and this is also, remember that the Bolsheviks through Lenin took power in the Russian Revolution that occurred in October 1917, and this is when again we saw huge outbursts of anti-Semitism in Russia. So it's always been a spiritually very, very dark country and a very hostile country to the Jewish people. So in the 1960s, we saw that the Soviet Union, through the Russian government, started to attempt to make life extremely difficult for its Jewish populations and Jews across the Soviet Union. And in the 1960s, the Soviets started to back the Arab states against Israel, especially after the Six-Day War of June 1967. There was talk of the Russians sending in one of their main naval fleets into the Mediterranean to kind of stop Israel from defeating the Jordanians and the Syrians and the Egyptians. And then after that war, we saw that it was through Soviet help that they completely rearmed and rebuilt the entire armies belonging to Syria and also to Egypt as well. In the 60s, over 100 Jews were executed on trumped up crimes of financial crimes, and the government systematically closed synagogues. They published many anti-Semitic books that accused Judaism of being like a Nazi religion. In the Soviet newspapers, they would often portray the Israeli general, Moshe Dayan, with the famous eye patch, in cartoons wearing an armband with Nazi swastikas on it. So we also see then that, but this also created at this time an incredible awakening amongst the Jewish people.
After the Six-Day War in June of 1967, there was an emboldening of Soviet Jewry as tens of thousands of Soviet Jews began to study Jewish history and text and attended some Torah celebrations and applied for immigration visas to Israel. So we see that through that victory there was much hope that we can actually go now perhaps to our own homeland.
And also I think the Jews of the Soviet Union felt probably for the first time under kind of Soviet control that they felt proud to be Jewish.
Yeah.
You know, a very marginalized group within Soviet society. They were stripped of their religious identity, their religious practices, and so and this is what we see with many Jews who made Aliyah to Israel after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Empire in 1991. Is that they didn't have a Jewish identity. They didn't know much about their Jewish history, their Jewish roots. All they knew is that they were ethnically Jewish, but they didn't know anything about the Jewish traditions or Jewish faith until they came to Israel. So that played a major role.
Absolutely. Now, there was a discouraging of this en masse immigration, understandably, because though the Jews were oppressed, Russia viewed them as necessary for the running of their society to some degree. They didn't want masses of Jews suddenly leaving the country. And indeed, as we see throughout history, the Jews have been a blessing wherever they've gone. Even though they've been hated in so many ways, they have brought success in many places. They've enabled better infrastructure to be built up, technology, all of these sorts of things, health care. Across the board, you can see that the Jews have been a massive part of blessing the nations in which they found themselves. And that's part of those covenant promises. If you go back, I don't know, maybe there's some viewer who's thinking, okay, well, you're talking about the Old Testament. These are old covenant things. And there may be someone here who is thinking that all of that's been replaced. It's not been, because the covenants that God made, we have some conditional and some that are unconditional. And his covenant that he made for the people to return to their homeland is an unconditional covenant. He recognizes, even at the end of Deuteronomy, that the people are going to turn away from him. The Jews will turn away from worshiping the one true God, and they will be scattered among the nations. That's recognized also in the prophets. Particularly, we can think of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. But the promise remains. The promise is always there. I will bring you back home. I will bring you back home. I will give you peace. And it's actually that it's after he's brought them back home that he then reminds them and reveals once more himself to them in such a way that they come to know him in a redemptive fashion. So that promise is there. There were individuals who pushed back against this. Of course, this refusal of in the part of the Soviets as well. There were Jewish leaders who were imprisoned. This gave birth to the Soviet Refusnik movement led by Nathan Sharansky. Fast forward, Berlin Wall collapses in 1989, a wonderful moment in history. And the fall of the Soviet Union sees over 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union making Aliyah to Israel.
And a small state of Israel absorbing over 1 million, all pretty much came at the same time within the space of a few years, which is an incredible achievement and incredible work by the Jewish Agency as well in fulfilling prophecy. I mean, it talks about in Jeremiah that the Lord would bring his people back from the land of the north and from the south. Do not let my people go, and I will bring you from the four corners of the earth. And what we're really seeing through this is history unfold and the Bible becoming alive. This is what's so exciting about this.
With tens of thousands of Jews still in the former Soviet Union, not just the 150,000 in Russia, but spread across those former Soviet states, the battle is not done. Anti-Semitism, of course, continues, and neo-Nazism as well continues in many places also. But as a result of this, we can look at Ukraine's Jewish community. Here's a report on Ukraine's Jewish community and how it is fearing Soviet-esque persecution once more reemerging.
What's your dream here for this place?
To restore it will be a sign that whatever enemies could do to destroy humanity is not possible to kill. How you know that
Melach Sheket's office sits next to what was once Ukraine's oldest synagogue. For 359 years, it stood as a symbol of a thriving religious community. Then came 1941, which brought Nazi bombings, followed by the massacre of 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews. Now, 81 years later, Shaket, a prominent Jewish leader here, sees dark clouds gathering once again with Russia's invasion.
Most important that the people would follow the Almighty's commitments. And if they will do it, then peace will prevail.
Putin's obsession to retake Ukraine could erase the way of life many here have fought for since independence 31 years ago.
It seems like he wants to create a new USSR. That means that we all need to be afraid. That's scary.
Seket says Ukrainian Jews also suffered during that reign as communist leaders tried to snuff out their religion. He worries it could happen again with a complete Russian takeover.
Especially Jews, they had a second Holocaust, spiritual Holocaust in the Soviet time. It was a horrible totalitarian system.
With tens of thousands of people on the run from Kyiv and other cities, Rabbi Mordecai Shlomo Bald, leader of Lviv's largest synagogue, is ready to receive them. He wants his congregation to be a blessing to those in their hour of need.
Please use me. Use me not to be a bone in somebody's throat, but use me to be beneficial, to make it pleasant, to make it better, to make it easier for people around.
George Thomas, CBN News, Lviv.
Well, fascinating report there. Thankful for our friends at CBN. And thank you for the emails that you are sending in to us just now. I understand that in Chernobyl there are the many graves of Jewish people that have been slaughtered. That's from Mike. Are you aware of?
A bit, not so much.
Yeah.
I am aware.
Thanks for that insight, Mike.
I am aware of that.
Also, this is from June. Good evening, gents. I fear I must correct Reagan about how the Jews were treated in the British Isles. England did persecute the Jews, but Scotland never did. So when using vocabulary which means all of the British Isles, you disseminate an error. My apologies, June. And of course, I'm aware that Scotland never actually had any expulsion of the Jews. And in fact, when the Jews were expelled from England, many found themselves going to Scotland. So
1290, yeah.
Quite right, June. Thank you for the slap on the wrist there. That well deserved. We can't. Scotland gets enough flack as it is, I think, for other things. Thank you for your emails. Do please send in any other text and messages. Tell us, Simon, bring us to the present day again. We've talked about the pogroms. We've talked about the Soviet-era persecution. It looks like, as we've just seen in that news report there, and as we've been talking about, there may be some other attacks on the Jews in view. We've talked about the Jewish Agency being closed down. What is the significance of that?
Well, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, effectively what it means is that you are cutting Russian Jews off from Israel, from the rest of the Jewish community around the world. You are preventing the Jewish Agency from helping Russian Jews who want to make Aliyah to Israel, preventing them from doing so. This would then also cause a huge diplomatic backlash. I mean, for example, on Sunday, according to the Jewish News Syndicate, Israel's new Prime Minister Yair Lapid warned on Sunday that the shuttering of the Jewish Agency's offices in Russia could have a serious impact on diplomatic relations between Jerusalem and Moscow. So they say now with the officials with the Moscow District Court was quoted on Thursday as saying that Russia's Minister of Justice aims to shut down the Jewish Agency's Russian branch. A court hearing will be scheduled for the 28th of July. And the situation they thought was small is actually escalating. Now, earlier today, I recorded a very special interview with the former chairman of the Jewish Agency. Let's have a look. Zev Bielski, who was not only an IDF major, but was also a member of the Israeli Knesset and was a chairman of the Jewish Agency when Ariel Sharon was Israel's prime minister. Zev, warm welcome to Behind the Headlines.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Zev, can you just share something of your extraordinary
career in Israel, being a major in the IDF between those really important years between 1967 and 1970, your role as a member of the Israeli Knesset, and also your role as chairman of the Jewish Agency when Ariel Sharon was Israel's prime minister.
That's right. And it seems to be that I was born to do public activities. All my life, I did for the people of Israel, for the Jewish people. I feel I'm like a missionary, a Shaliach. By the way, I went to South Africa years ago when I was a bachelor, and I was sent by the Jewish Agency to help Jews that want to come to live in Israel. And I stayed there for 3 years. There I met Karen, and we got married in South Africa, and she came back with me. And since then, we are here in Israel. We have got 4 children. We've got grandchildren. And all my life, I did public activities. I was the mayor of Ra'anana, the city that we are living in. And as you described, a major in the army and chairman of the Jewish Agency and the World Zionist Organization. And everywhere where I could do some good for the people of Israel, for the Jewish people, I feel that this is my mission and I love to do it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'd love to have you on my main program, which is the Middle East Report, and have a whole hour with you. But sadly, due to time, we can't do that today. But can you share something about what is the Jewish Agency and why is the Jewish Agency so important to Israel, especially when it comes to Aliyah, Jews around the world making that important step to immigrate to Eretz Israel?
Well, the Jewish Agency was born before the State of Israel, and the vision was to have a Jewish organization that the headquarters in Israel, but it goes all over the world, and wherever there are Jews living there, the Jewish Agency will be there. Either will help them to come on Aliyah to Israel, to come and live in Israel, because that's what the prophet said, that one day all the people, all the Jewish people will come on Aliyah and live in Israel. And if they are not coming to Israel, at least to keep the contact with the children, with the families, to keep contact with Israel. And from the beginning, the State of Israel was the center of the Jewish world. The State of Israel was born after the Holocaust, and we said never again. So how never again? We'll create a state in the place that for thousands of years was promised to his people, and we'll create a State of Israel. And the basic law of the State of Israel is the law of return. It means every Jew, wherever he is, entitled to come on Aliyah to Israel. We don't ask questions, not how old are you, how much money you've got, or what's your profession. If you are a Jew, you're entitled to come automatically to Israel and to get immediately citizenship. And to be the chairman of this organization is actually to fulfill the dream and to try and help every Jew wherever he is, sometimes in distress, sometimes in wealth. If he wants to fulfill the dream and come and build his house, his home here in Israel, to grow his children in a Jewish way here in Israel, this is a country for him. And as a chairman of the Jewish Agency, I was running all over the world, talking to the people and say to them, listen, if you want, please come, we'll help you, we'll do everything that we can do to able that you can come and live in Israel. So this were 4 years, and usually the chairman of the Jewish Agency is elected by the prime minister of the State of Israel and the Jewish communities all over the world. And as you mentioned, Ariel Sharon was the prime minister. He asked me to come and run the Jewish Agency. I said, of course, Sarah, I will do it with pleasure. And when I was elected, I started working for the benefit of the State of Israel and the Jewish people.
Amazing, amazing. What was the main challenge you faced when you were chairman of the Jewish Agency during the time of, was it 2005, that kind of era?
That's right. It was, you see, but this time the gates of the Russian Empire that was before were open for Jews to come out, and about 1 million people came from Russia to Israel. And one of the main tasks of the Jewish Agency is to try and help these people that came to Israel, because they come without a language and they have to start a new life in a new place. So the Jewish Agency was very much involved in more people coming to Israel and those that came to try and settle. The second thing, during this year, there was a war in Lebanon, and the Jewish Agency raised money all over the world to help the people that live in the north of Israel, because they had to stay all the time in bomb shells because of the Hezbollah. And the Jewish Agency was there to provide air conditions into the bomb shelters, televisions. It was very hard. Sometimes you have to sit days and days and days, 24 hours, 48 hours a week in a bomb shelter in the middle of the summer, and there was no air condition, no television. So the Jewish Agency was very much involved. And after a month and a half, when the war is over, so we were very proud to say that we were part of the effort of the Israelis to face this hostile from the north. And the participation of Jewish people from all over the world was very remarkable.
Amazing. And Zev, can you just give our viewers a little bit understanding about what's happening now with Russia and President Putin threatening to close the activities of the Jewish Agency in Russia, which essentially means that the Russian Jews cannot make Aliyah to Israel?
The Russian authorities in the last year or 2 years, they started asking a lot of questions, what the Jewish Agency is doing, how we deal with the people. And sometimes there were claims that actually the Jewish Agency is keeping a list of all the people, and maybe we would like to encourage people of quality to come to Israel. And now I believe it's part of what happens with Ukraine and like things around it. So we got a letter, the Jewish Agency got a letter that they would like to call them to court and to find out in court whether the Jewish Agency can carry on the mission in Russia. So the Israeli Prime Minister got involved, and the Israeli President got involved, and they tried to talk to Putin and his people, and to say that actually we're not breaking the law, and if there's something that we are doing that the Russian authority think it's not right, we can negotiate it, we can speak about it. We would just like to keep the good terms that we had between Russia and Israel. And I believe that eventually we'll come to an agreement and we'll be able to carry on, because the mission is not only to bring people from Russia to Israel. The mission of the Jewish Agency is to keep those people that would like to keep the contact with Israel, with Judaism, for the children to learn, the heritage, to learn what happened to the Jewish people over the Holocaust, what happened to us before we had a state of our own. And this contact is very important to us, and it's very important to them. So we really hope that the Russian authority will understand it and will come to understanding and will carry on the holy work that the Jewish Agency is doing in Russia.
Absolutely. And Israel's relationship with Russia is always kind of sensitive and also complicated. And it's now even more complicated after the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. Can you explain the complexities that Israel faces? Because we know that, for example, that Israel needs to carry out airstrikes against Iranian military targets and build up of Iranian military targets in Syria that threatens Israel, and also the danger of providing laser-guided missiles to the Islamic terrorist organization Hezbollah, as we mentioned earlier in the program. And we know that there are Russian troops also based in Russia. So it shared that the complicated and sensitive relationship that the Jewish state has with Putin's Russia.
You see, it starts a long time ago. We think, it's written in the Bible that we, the chosen people, but we can't understand why, as a chosen people, everybody is against us. And we are the only country in the world that there is a sincere threat to wipe us off the earth. And unfortunately, the Iranians put billions of dollars and a lot of effort to try and destroy the state of Israel. By the way, I really don't know why they can live in peace with us, and they've got no common border, and I don't know why they have to pour so much money into terror all over the world to threat Israel and to try to wipe us off the earth. The Russians are playing very important role in the Middle East. They are in Syria. Last week there was a meeting between Putin and the Iranians. Everybody knows in the world that actually the Iranians would like to have a nuclear weapon, and they say loud and clear that if they will able to destroy Israel, they will do it. So if they'll have a nuclear weapon, this is a serious threat for the state of Israel. We can't afford it. And that's why the whole world is trying to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Based on this, the Russians have got now sanctions from most of the Western world. And we in Israel have to live between being part of the Western world, and on the other hand, we have got a good relationship with the Russians over the years, and we really appreciate that they let so many Jews leaving Russia at the time and come and live in Israel, and they change the economic state and the cultural state of the state of Israel. So we're trying to live in between. So the state of Israel is trying to be part of the whole Western world that actually say that what happens in Ukraine is not right. And on the other hand, we're trying to keep a good relationship with the Russians because we have got a common interest, and we hope that the visit of Putin in Iran is not a sign that he's going to be part of evil regime, that every place in the world that you find terror, you find the hands of the Iranians there. So in between with the Jewish agencies got into it. I don't think it's something the Jewish agency did, but when people are fighting over other things, maybe sometimes people hurt. And I really hope that the mission of the Jewish agency, which is a holy mission, to keep people in touch with Israel, to keep them Jews, to understand what happened to the Jewish people all over the world, and to fulfill the dream of the prophets that after 2,000 years, 3,000 years, it's time for the people of the Jewish people to come to Israel, to live in a free world, in a free country. And I hope that we'll be able to negotiate with the Russians. In few days, we'll find out if, because they bring it to court, and we'll see according to the court in Russia if they mean, that we can discuss and maybe change few things if needed, or they're going to close the Jewish agency offices in Russia. And it means to prevent from hundreds of thousands of Jews to be in touch with Israel and with the Jewish people.
And so, according to the Times of Israel, there's a discussion talking about a high-level diplomatic mission to Russia right now. to discuss. We're trying to discuss with Putin ways to come around this legal disagreement to prevent the Jewish agency from being closed in Russia, which would be an absolute tragedy. If that does happen, there's talk of discussion of actually pulling Israel's ambassador out of Moscow, and a complete deterioration in diplomatic relations between Russia and Israel. How do you think this can be avoided?
I think that in a personal relationship between the president of the State of Israel, Herzog, which Herzog until recently was the chairman of the Jewish Agency, and he knows exactly what the Jewish Agency is doing, and he developed, since he was elected as the president of the State of Israel, he developed a personal relationship with Putin. And yesterday he said that he will do what has to be done, and the less we talk, the better it is. So we really hope that the goodwill and the personal relationship will prevent closing the offices of the Jewish Agency.
And finally, Zev, how can our Christian viewers pray into this situation to ensure that Russian Jews can make Aliyah to Israel, that the Jewish Agency can flourish, operate in Russia? And also, how can they support what you say, the holy work, which is the correct terminology to describe the incredible work that the Jewish Agency is doing, not only for Israel, but the Jewish people all over the world?
I think you know what you do all the time, and we're really blessed. Is to pray and to try and talk to everybody in the world to prevent from Iran to get a nuclear weapon. It all comes to Iran eventually because they finance the Hezbollah in Lebanon, they finance the Hamas in Gaza. They don't want to live in peace. They tried all the time to live in terror. And we are a small nation, a small state. We are only 9 million people living in Israel. And it's very difficult to fight billions of dollars that are pouring into these terror organizations against Israel. And every Christian, every man on earth that would like to see justice and to see that the Jewish people, after what happened to us, after the Holocaust, 6 million people of ours went in the trains to the gas chambers. And we still remember it. We have got still people living in Israel. They've got numbers on their hands because they were in these camps that very few people get out of this. So out of all this Holocaust, we created the State of Israel, and we would appreciate every support that we have got. In Israel, everybody can live freely, whether you are a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, a Druze, doesn't matter. It's a free country, it's a democratic country. Yes, it's a Jewish country, but it's a Jewish democratic country. And we would like to develop ourselves. We would like to be among all nations in the world, and we would like to live in peace. Peace is the word that we pray every day, few times. We pray for peace, and whoever can help us with this and protest against the Iranian regime that is taking all the resources that they have got and put it into terror and trying to develop a nuclear weapon. Why, for hell, the Iranians need a nuclear weapon? Tell me why. And they say loud and clear, this will be against Israel. We would like to destroy Israel. And the proxies in the Middle East, in the Hezbollah and the Hamas, they speak the same like the regime Iranians are speaking, destroying Israel. Why speak like this? Why not live in peace? So whoever can help us in this effort will be blessed.
Amen to that. And Zev, thank you so much for being our special guest on Behind the Headlines. And thank you for sharing us the incredible work of the Jewish Agency. And thank you for your service and dedication to the only Jewish state in the world, which is the nation of Israel.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
A fantastic interview there with Zev Bielski, with Simon. Thank you both very much for that. We do have an email here that I think is important to deal with. Why is this program all about immigration? You're a Christian channel. I cannot understand why you are constantly banging on about this issue.
It's not immigration. This is biblical.
It goes on.
Prophecy.
It goes on. Please don't use the word of God to highlight a political issue. The Israel of God are those who are saved by His grace, not a physical nation, many of whom continue to reject Christ. I have something, and then I'll come to Simon. That is wrong on many levels, actually. There's one way, yes, that we know to salvation. There's one way, that is through Yeshua HaMashiach, that's Jesus, our Lord and Savior, okay? And we are a Christian channel. But as a Christian channel, we believe in both the Old and the New Testament, and we believe that God's covenant promises endure. I've already referenced those covenant promises. You can go back to the end of Deuteronomy. You can go to Jeremiah, where it's explicitly stated that the people will be scattered. The Jews, that's who he's speaking to, the Jews will be scattered around all of the nations, but God will bring them back to the land that He promised to their forefather Abraham. There's no other way that we can put it other than say this is biblical prophecy being fulfilled. There's a historical element, if you go back in church history, even in recent days, but to the time, let's just go back to those eras of the Pogroms. We had people in this country like J.C. Ryle, Charles Spurgeon, who were both very actively speaking very prophetically of the coming return of the Jews to the land of Israel. If I might just read a brief excerpt from J.C. Ryle. He says, I beseech you to take up anew the prophetical scriptures and to pray that you may not err in interpreting their meaning. Read them in the light of these two great pole stars, the first and second advents of Jesus Christ. He goes on to challenge against the over-spiritualization of the name Israel in Scripture without, forsaking the actual identity of the Jewish people. And this is the big bit before Simon, I'm sure, wants to say something as well to that. I
think you've said it really well.
Yeah, suppose the Jews ask you, if you take all the prophecies of the Old Testament and their simple literal meaning, suppose He asks you if you believe in a literal personal advent of Messiah to reign over the earth in glory, a literal restoration of Judah and Israel to Palestine, a literal rebuilding and restoration of Zion and Jerusalem. Suppose the unconverted Jew puts these questions to you. What answer are you prepared to make? Will you dare to tell him that the Old Testament prophecies are this kind are not to be taken in their plain literal sense? Will you dare to tell him that the words Zion, Jerusalem, Jacob, Judah, Ephraim, Israel do not mean what they seem to mean, but mean the church of Christ? Will you dare to tell him that the glorious kingdom and future blessedness of Zion, so often dwelt upon in prophecy, mean nothing more than the gradual Christianizing of the world by missionaries and gospel preaching? Will you dare to tell him that you think it carnal to expect a literal rebuilding of Jerusalem, to expect a literal coming of Messiah to reign? Zechariah says it, His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Right, so Aliyah, it's a biblical concept. It is a concept that sees the fulfillment of these prophecies. It's good news. You couldn't get more gospel than that. And the gospel, which is to the Jew first and then to the Gentile.
Absolutely, but also you deny the whole character of God and His faithfulness. And if God says, I make an everlasting covenant, He makes an everlasting covenant. He doesn't change His mind. If He changes His mind and He rejects the Jewish people and the church has replaced Israel, then the church is in serious problems, because He could do exactly the same to the church. So we are told in Romans 9, 10, 11 by the great apostle Paul not to be haughty and not to be arrogant when it comes to the Jewish people. Over to you, Reagan.
That's perfect. We have to also remember that in light of this particular topic concerning Putin's closing the door of Aliyah to the Jews, that God's purposes, His plans are not defeated, far from it. He is sovereign in the circumstance that the Jews are experiencing and going through right now. Putin needs to beware lest what occurred with Pharaoh is revisited to some degree upon him. God is very clear that he blesses those who bless Israel and he curses those who curse them. And that is specifically speaking of the Jewish people, undeniably. This program's gone fast, Simon. Thank you for all of your hard work, and thank you, viewers, for your interactions. It's been a real blessing. We pray it's encouraged you all. We will hope to see you next week here on Behind the Headlines. Until then, God bless you. Have a great evening. Continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and Israel.